The honourable member for St. John's South, Mount Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of Bill C-501, an act respecting a national hunting, trapping, and fishing heritage day. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are great hunters, great trappers, great fishermen, Mr. Speaker. Be it codfish, salmon, trout, Arctic char, moose, caribou, seals, rabbit, beavers, tur, grouse. We live off the land, Mr. Speaker. We live off the sea. Our First Nation and Aboriginal peoples have lived off the land and sea for thousands of years, Mr. Speaker, and they continue to do so. Our ancestors who got off the boat, primarily from Europe, made a life in Newfoundland and Labrador on the edge of the North Atlantic, in the most inhospitable of places, to be closest to the fish that sustained them. Life was hard, Mr. Speaker. Life was brutal. Life was work from dusk till dawn, but that life made us strong. The life made us self-sufficient. Certainly not the richest of people, Mr. Speaker, not in terms of cash dollars, but rich in terms of how hunting, trapping, and fishing built our character, shaped our culture, formed our heritage. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is important because hunting, fishing, and trapping have been instrumental to the social, economic, and cultural development of communities in every region of Canada, Mr. Speaker. Not just Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker, although that's my focus as a Member of Parliament for St. John's South, Mount Pearl in Newfoundland and Labrador. Hunting, fishing, and trapping still play a vital role in the outports and communities that dot Newfoundland and Labrador, urban and rural, Mr. Speaker. Most freezers and most homes contain local moose. They contain local fish. There aren't many outport kitchens that don't have bottled salmon or rabbit or moose, Mr. Speaker. I was on the south coast of Labrador last spring, Mr. Speaker, and the woman whose home I entered, she apologized as soon as I got there because she didn't have anything prepared to eat. By the time I left that house, Mr. Speaker, I had eaten bottled salmon, bottled lobster, rabbit, tur, the sweetest partridge berries I had ever tasted, homemade bread, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden. I had had a feast, Mr. Speaker, with food prepared from the land and food prepared from the sea. But the best meal I've had so far this year, Mr. Speaker, the best meal was in a fishing shed in Petty Harbour, just outside St. John's, after a day on the North Atlantic fishing crab. When we got in, one of the fishermen pulled out a couple of bottles of moose and cooked it with some onions on the floor of the shed on a huge frying pan on a propane flame. I can taste it now, Mr. Speaker. Lovely. We still live off the land and off the sea, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud of where we come from. And this bill is recognition of that, the importance of hunting, trapping, and fishing to our way of life. But there are problems, Mr. Speaker, problems that we should reflect on in this debate. Let's begin with moose. The animals, moose, aren't indigenous to Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker, to the island portion of the province. Moose were only introduced successfully in 1904, but since then the population has ballooned, it's exploded, to the point that moose vehicle collisions are a real problem, Mr. Speaker. There are hundreds, literally hundreds, of moose vehicle collisions every year. I had a collision myself in October 2012 on the edge of Terra Nova National Park. I'll never forget. It was dark, it was misty, and I was driving slow, relatively slow. The speed limit was 100 kilometers an hour. I was driving 80, and out of nowhere, in front of me appeared a moose, and I hit it head on. And I remember thinking, if that moose flies through the windshield, I'm dead. It rolled over my bonnet, flipped over the windshield. The moose died about 5 minutes later. I had about $9,000 damage to my vehicle. I lived. I'm here to tell the tale. The Conservative MP for the Manitoba riding of Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley. He recommended last summer that we cut down on moose vehicle collisions. How, Mr. Speaker? What was his recommendation? His recommendation was that we kill every last moose. Let me quote the Conservative MP, Mr. Speaker, a quote contained in a press release that was on the MP's website. Quote, "The obvious solution is to kill, bracket, in other words, kill close bracket, all the moose on the island. Removing all the moose from the island will be a huge public safety benefit. It is the environmentally friendly action to take, and it makes economic sense. For me, Mr. Speaker, that makes no sense. I stand here today, Mr. Speaker, in support of an act respecting a National Hunting, Trapping and Fishing Heritage Day. An outrageous suggestion such as killing every last moose, an entire population, a food source, Mr. Speaker, doesn't respect our culture. It doesn't respect our hunters or even nature, Mr. Speaker. Moose may have been introduced to Newfoundland, but codfish, Mr. Speaker, the cod are what drew us to Newfoundland and Labrador. Codfish were once Newfoundland and Labrador currency. In cod we trust, Mr. Speaker. Not anymore. For the true story of the destruction of our commercial groundfish fisheries, such as cod and such as flounder, I recommend a new book, Mr. Speaker. It was released 2 weeks ago, and it's called Empty Nets: How Greed and Politics Wiped Out the World's Greatest Fisheries. And that book is by a former industry leader named Gus Etchegaray, Mr. Speaker. The world's greatest fisheries, in case the honourable members in this House don't realize it, Mr. Speaker, the world's greatest fisheries were on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. Codfish stocks since then have been pounded to the point that the Committee for the Status of Endangered Wildlife of Canada, in Canada, or CASAWIC is the acronym, is recommending Atlantic cod be declared an endangered species. Endangered species. There's still a food fishery, Mr. Speaker, where Newfoundlanders and Labradorians can fish cod for our tables. But that fishery only takes place during a narrow window with strict catch restrictions. In Newfoundland and Labrador, known for its fish, the decades have actually come where it's illegal for most of the year for a young boy or a young girl to fish a cod from the edge of a wharf. That day came more than 20 years ago, Mr. Speaker, a day nobody thought would come. 21 years after the Government of Canada shut down the northern cod fishery for the first time in a 500-plus year history, and there's still no recovery plan for that northern cod, Mr. Speaker. Shocking. No recovery plan for a fishery that was shut down, a commercial fishery that was shut down more than 20 years ago. Let's move on to seals, Mr. Speaker. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are proud of our sealing heritage. But let me read you this quote from 1985. This quote comes from a sealer, and it was contained in the report of the Royal Commission into Sealing and Sealers in Canada. Royal Commission, 1985. Quote, "As a sealer, as a fisherman standing before you today, I say to you that I am the endangered species. I am endangered, but I still fight back. I will survive. I will not let animal rights become more important than human rights. I will not let people give souls to animals while they rob me of my human dignity and right to earn a livelihood." 1985, Mr. Speaker, that quote came from. Our tradition of sealing suffered yet another blow this week with the decision of the World Trade Organization to uphold the European ban on Canadian seal products. The Conservative government has announced plans to appeal that ruling. But if this government was serious about standing up for the seal hunt, Mr. Speaker, it would have made the seal ban a make-or-break issue during trade talks. It did not do that, Mr. Speaker. Under this Conservative government, we've witnessed the greatest body blows to the seal harvest in our history, with ban after ban after ban. So a National Hunting, Trapping and Fishing Heritage Day would be a good time to reflect on this government's absolute failure to stand up for the seal hunt. A Heritage Day would also be a good time to reflect on how this government has gutted the Federal Fisheries Act, Mr. Speaker. A recent federal court ruling in Newfoundland and Labrador noted that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans has the ability to control the alteration, disruption, or destruction of fish habitat. In other words, Mr. Speaker, if there's no monetary value on a fish, it's worth nothing. It's worth nothing. To sum up, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill, but I also support policies that ensure hunting, trapping, and fishing can continue in this country in a sustainable and meaningful way. It's one thing for this government to say it supports hunters, trappers, and fishermen, But if their policies do nothing to protect our land and protect our sea, do nothing to protect our culture and our heritage, then the words, Mr. Speaker, are meaningless. Then the Fishing Heritage Day will mean nothing.